It was a serene Saturday morning, sunlight gently blanketing the neighborhood in warmth, highlighting the vibrant petals and fresh greenery of my carefully curated garden. Gardening had become more than a hobby. It was my refuge, a peaceful escape from life's relentless pressures. As I placed another vibrant shrub into the earth, I was lost in the simple tranquility, completely unaware that my peace was about to be shattered. A sharp click-clack of high heels echoed loudly along the sidewalk, a sound I had learned to dread. Karen, queen of our neighborhood's HOA, her blonde hair perfectly styled, eyes always scanning for violations, clipboard clutched like a badge of authority. Her presence immediately soured the morning. "Just what do you think you're doing?" Her voice was shrill, already dripping with disdain. I stood, brushing the soil from my jeans calmly, though my pulse quickened slightly. "Morning, Karen. Just doing a bit of gardening." "Gardening?" she sneered, eyeing my work with disgust. "You've disregarded HOA aesthetic guidelines again. This mess is unacceptable." "They're shrubs, Karen," I tried to reason gently, feeling neighbors' eyes watching the interaction from behind curtains. "Surely a few shrubs aren't hurting anyone." She straightened aggressively, lips pursed. "You know very well that any external changes must be approved by the HOA board. You're openly defying our community rules." "Rules?" I repeated incredulously. "I'm enhancing my property. Isn't that the whole point?" Karen scoffed audibly, looking down at her clipboard, shaking her head in exaggerated disappointment. "You're forcing my hand," she said dramatically. In an instant, she pulled out her phone, speaking loudly enough for everyone to hear. "This is Karen Simmons. We have a severe violation at property 223 Maple Street. Immediate response required." Neighbors began emerging slowly onto their porches, sensing an impending spectacle. "Hey, before we jump into this insane story, I have a small favor to ask. If you enjoy these wild HOA horror stories, please hit that like button and subscribe. It really helps the channel grow. And let me know in the comments, where are you watching from? I love seeing how far our community spreads. Now back to the chaos. Minutes later, a golf cart emblazoned with the HOA logo screeched dramatically to a halt, kicking up gravel unnecessarily. 3 HOA guards hopped out, adopting exaggerated stances of authority, their chests puffed out as if they were actual law enforcement. "Sir," Gary, the head guard, began with forced bravado, "you are in direct violation of the HOA landscaping policy. You must cease immediately." I stared incredulously. "Gary, it's just shrubs. I'm planting bushes in my own yard." "Community standards supersede private interests," Karen interjected, crossing her arms smugly. Gary, visibly nervous but bolstered by Karen's glare, fumbled for his plastic cuffs. "Sir, I'm going to ask you again to stop." I raised an eyebrow, thoroughly amused. "Are you really going to arrest me over plants?" "If necessary," Gary responded hesitantly, though clearly unsure of his authority. Neighbors whispered louder, phones recording the unfolding absurdity. I shook my head in disbelief, turning back to my gardening. Gary lunged forward unexpectedly, his face twisted into a mixture of forced bravado and uncertainty, gripping my arm roughly. Adrenaline exploded within me, every nerve awakening, muscle memory from countless high-stakes encounters activating instantaneously. Without conscious thought, I moved fluidly, my hand shooting forward to seize Gary's wrist, twisting his arm effortlessly behind his back in one swift, practiced motion. Gary cried out sharply, knees buckling as he dropped onto the hard pavement. Pain contorted his face, beads of sweat forming instantly across his forehead. "Ah! Stop, please!" Karen gasped loudly, staggering backward, her eyes wide with a blend of shock, outrage, and genuine fear. The clipboard trembled in her grip. "Let him go this instant!" she shrieked, voice shrill and panicked, drawing more neighbors out onto their lawns. I tightened my grip slightly, feeling Gary tense with pain, yet maintaining control over my emotions. "He assaulted me," I declared evenly, my voice icy yet unwavering. "I'm merely defending myself." Gary whimpered again, his bravado completely shattered, the plastic cuffs clattering uselessly to the ground beside him. "I'm sorry," he pleaded weakly, eyes darting desperately toward Karen for support. "Please, man, I didn't mean—" I leaned closer, lowering my voice but infusing it with stern authority. "Never put your hands on me again, understand?" He nodded frantically, humiliation and fear etched deeply into his face. Gently, yet with deliberate firmness, I released him, watching as he collapsed forward slightly, nursing his wrist. Karen seethed visibly, her breathing labored, cheeks crimson with fury. She took a menacing step forward, glaring venomously, her voice trembling with barely contained rage. "You'll regret this!" I stood taller, my gaze unflinching, meeting her wrath with resolute calm. "If you're so certain you're right, Karen, then call the real police. I'd love to see you explain your twisted sense of justice to them." She opened her mouth as if to respond, then hesitated, eyes flickering with indecision and fury. Clenching her fists tightly, Karen shot one last venomous look at me before storming off, clipboard now crumpled in her grip, muttering threats and promises of revenge beneath her breath, leaving a tense, stunned silence in her wake. Later, at my attorney's office, I sat tensely in the plush leather chair, tapping my fingers nervously against the polished oak desk. Jason Michaels, my longtime lawyer and confidant, sat across from me, his expression focused yet reassuringly calm. The room was quiet except for the faint hum of the air conditioning, creating an atmosphere that underscored the seriousness of the situation. Jason listened intently as I recounted every detail of the confrontation, occasionally jotting precise notes in his legal pad. His keen eyes narrowed thoughtfully when I described Karen's escalation and Gary's physical aggression. "Jason," I finally said, leaning forward slightly, my voice tense with restrained frustration, "she's getting bolder every day. Today she actually had her security goons physically attack me." He sighed softly, removing his glasses slowly and placing them gently on the desk. He leaned back in his chair, folding his hands contemplatively. "This is textbook harassment," he confirmed gravely, meeting my eyes directly. "Karen has overstepped significantly. It's no longer just petty HOA disputes. This is becoming dangerously personal." "Exactly," I agreed, my voice strained with urgency. "What's our next move? I can't let her keep escalating like this." Jason picked up his pen again, tapping it rhythmically against the paper. "You need to document everything meticulously," he emphasized firmly. "Every interaction, every conversation, every threat. Especially this physical encounter today. Photos, videos, eyewitness accounts, leave nothing undocumented." "Understood," I responded decisively, determination hardening my voice. "But how do we counterattack legally? I can't let her intimidate me or my family." Jason leaned forward, his eyes serious and unwavering. "We build an ironclad case, piece by piece. Karen won't surrender easily, and she'll use every trick available to her. But I assure you," he added firmly, a faint, confident smile emerging, "when we present this evidence clearly and methodically, her house of cards will collapse spectacularly." I took a deep breath, feeling a renewed sense of hope and resolve. "Let's do this right," I said quietly, steeling myself for the battles ahead. Jason stood, extending his hand with reassuring strength. "We will," he promised solemnly, his gaze steady and unwavering. "And when we do, Karen will learn there are consequences for abusing her power." Determined to counterattack, I spent hours meticulously installing discreet, high-definition security cameras around my property, placing them carefully to cover every angle without arousing suspicion. Each night I reviewed the footage in the quiet solitude of my home office, watching grimly as Karen and her cronies repeatedly violated my space. One evening, as the soft blue glow of the monitors illuminated my face, my heart quickened at a particularly incriminating clip. Karen appeared boldly in my driveway, her face twisted with disdain, directing two men in HOA uniforms. They methodically vandalized my carefully maintained shrubs, ripping out plants with ruthless efficiency. "Destroy it!" Karen hissed clearly, her voice sharp and cold through the speaker. "Make sure nothing's left. He needs to learn his place." "Ma'am, this doesn't feel right." One of the cronies hesitated, glancing nervously toward the camera, unknowingly capturing every moment. Karen stepped closer, her voice dangerously low yet crystal clear. "If you question my orders again, you'll find yourself looking for a new job tomorrow. Understood?" The man nodded hastily, clearly intimidated, returning reluctantly to his destructive work. My fists clenched instinctively as anger burned within me. Each recorded violation was another nail in Karen's coffin, another brick removed from her carefully constructed facade of righteousness. I meticulously cataloged each clip, each timestamp, building an irrefutable body of evidence that would soon turn Karen's arrogance into her downfall. Community polarization intensified dramatically, turning our once peaceful neighborhood into a battleground of whispered alliances and tense encounters. Each morning felt heavier, conversations grew hushed, eyes darted nervously at every street corner, sensing the brewing conflict beneath the surface. Mr. and Mrs. Jenkins, my elderly neighbors who had always greeted me with warm smiles, now became vocal supporters. One evening, standing defiantly on their front porch, Mr. Jenkins raised his voice uncharacteristically as Karen passed by, clipboard in hand. "Karen, you're turning this community into a war zone," he accused boldly, his voice trembling but firm. "Enough is enough. We won't tolerate your bullying anymore." Karen paused, turning sharply with an icy glare, stepping toward him menacingly. "You should be careful, Mr. Jenkins," she said, her voice dripping with veiled threats. "You wouldn't want trouble coming to your doorstep next, would you?" Mrs. Jenkins moved protectively next to her husband, matching Karen's stare with defiance. "You don't scare us," she declared bravely, though her voice wavered slightly. "This community is waking up to your true colors." Other neighbors, however, retreated into fearful silence, avoiding eye contact, visibly uncomfortable whenever they encountered me or the Jenkins. A tension-laden silence greeted us at the local grocery store, at community meetings, even in casual passing on the sidewalks. Conversations abruptly ceased when I approached, and furtive glances hinted at secret discussions behind closed doors. One evening, Mark Thompson, a previously friendly neighbor, approached cautiously while I was retrieving mail. He glanced nervously around before whispering urgently, "Look, I support you, but I can't afford to cross Karen. She's threatening legal action against anyone who sides openly with you. Please understand." "I understand," I replied quietly, feeling a pang of disappointment but also a deep resolve. "Just be careful, Mark. Eventually someone needs to stand up to her, or she'll just keep pushing." He nodded slowly, eyes filled with regret and helplessness, before quickly retreating back inside, leaving me alone to confront the storm of hostility that Karen had unleashed upon our community. The HOA meeting exploded dramatically into confrontation, tension crackling through the packed community hall. Neighbors filled every seat, whispers buzzing anxiously as Karen took her place at the podium, clipboard clutched tightly, eyes narrowed in anticipation. I stood near the back, feeling the weight of dozens of curious, fearful, and supportive eyes fixed upon me. Karen cleared her throat sharply, silencing the crowd with a cold glare. "We have an urgent issue threatening our community standards," she began dramatically, her voice echoing through the hall. "One individual among us refuses to respect our rules, openly defying authority and endangering the harmony we've worked tirelessly to build." She paused deliberately, locking her gaze directly onto mine. "This individual," she continued venomously, "believes he's above our guidelines. His actions encourage disorder and chaos." Angry murmurs rippled through the crowd. I stood up slowly, feeling dozens of eyes shift towards me. "That's enough, Karen," I spoke loudly, voice steady and resolute. "Let's address the truth." "Truth?" Karen laughed bitterly, feigning shock. "You've repeatedly endangered community standards, planting unauthorized plants, threatening security officers, and openly defying—" "You're lying!" Mrs. Jenkins' voice suddenly rang out, silencing the room instantly. All heads turned toward the elderly woman who stood bravely, trembling slightly but eyes blazing fiercely. "We've watched you intimidate and bully neighbors for years, Karen. You've gone too far this time." Karen stiffened visibly, shocked by the bold challenge. "Careful, Mrs. Jenkins," she warned icily, voice barely controlled. "You wouldn't want to face consequences yourself, would you?" "Threatening an elderly neighbor now, Karen?" I interjected sharply, stepping forward decisively. "Is this your idea of leadership, bullying and intimidation?" "Don't twist my words," Karen snapped, composure visibly unraveling, her voice rising dramatically. "Your defiance threatens our entire community," I interrupted calmly, holding up a USB drive. Actually, Karen, your actions threaten this community, and I have the proof right here. Gasps rippled through the hall as Karen paled visibly, eyes widening briefly before narrowing again in desperation. More lies, she spat. Fabricated nonsense to distract from your own wrongdoing. Then let's see it, Mark Thompson called out suddenly from the back, courage finally overtaking his hesitation. Show us the evidence. Murmurs of agreement echoed through the room, eyes shifting between Karen and me expectantly. Jason stepped forward quietly, setting up a projector calmly but deliberately. Everyone deserves to see the truth, I declared firmly, clicking play. The screen flickered to life, footage from my security cameras illuminating Karen clearly orchestrating the destruction of my garden, her harsh voice echoing maliciously throughout the hall. Destroy everything. Make sure he learns his lesson. A collective gasp filled the room, shock and disbelief etching faces previously loyal to Karen. She staggered backward, clipboard trembling in her hand, face pale with horror and realization. That's not what happened, she stammered desperately, eyes darting frantically for support. But the silence that answered her was deafening, broken only by whispers of betrayal and anger. I stepped closer, voice firm and unyielding. Your reign of terror ends tonight, Karen! The room erupted in fierce whispers and heated debates, marking the beginning of Karen's dramatic unraveling. A hushed tension gripped the neighborhood as the tow truck rumbled loudly onto our street, lights flashing as if heralding an inevitable reckoning. Neighbors stepped cautiously onto their porches, drawn by the spectacle unfolding before their eyes. Karen's prized luxury SUV, gleaming pretentiously in the sunlight, had blatantly defied city parking regulations once too often. Now, justice had arrived in the form of city authorities finally enforcing the law. Karen appeared suddenly, her face contorted in disbelief and rage, storming toward the tow truck driver as he efficiently secured chains around her vehicle's wheels. "Stop this immediately!" she screamed, waving her clipboard aggressively. "Do you have any idea who I am? This is outrageous!" The tow driver paused briefly, unmoved by her display of entitlement. "Sorry, ma'am, you're illegally parked. My orders come directly from city enforcement." She whipped around, catching sight of me watching from my driveway. Her eyes flared with pure hatred. "You did this!" she hissed venomously, approaching me with dangerous speed. "You did this to yourself, Karen," I replied calmly, meeting her furious gaze without flinching. "I warned you not to overstep." "You'll regret humiliating me," she spat fiercely, voice low and dripping with menace. "This is far from over." Karen wasted no time exacting vengeance. Overnight, she turned the HOA into a personal vendetta machine, bombarding me relentlessly with exaggerated inspections and fines. My mailbox overflowed daily with citations for trivial offenses, noise disturbances from non-existent parties, landscaping infractions for grass height fractions of an inch off regulation, even baseless claims of dangerous behavior. Every day became a gauntlet of paranoia, suspicion clouding every neighborly interaction. Friendly faces turned fearful, avoiding my gaze, while Karen's cronies watched my every move openly, documenting imaginary violations with malicious glee. I felt increasingly cornered, exhausted yet stubbornly defiant. Early one Saturday, harsh mechanical sounds woke me abruptly. Heart pounding, I raced outside to an unthinkable sight. Karen stood triumphantly, supervising a crew systematically destroying my cherished garden. Plants I had painstakingly nurtured were being ruthlessly torn from the earth, tossed carelessly aside. "Stop this immediately!" I shouted furiously, approaching quickly. Karen turned, her expression gleaming with malicious satisfaction. "I warned you," she said calmly, voice icy and mocking, "but you just couldn't listen." "You're insane!" I growled, fists clenched tightly at my sides. "This has gone far enough." She smiled cruelly, stepping closer, voice dripping with chilling menace. "Oh, this is just the beginning. You should have thought twice before crossing me. I know where your family sleeps, remember that?" Rage surged violently through my veins, but I controlled it, focusing instead on her words as undeniable evidence against her. "You've crossed a line you'll deeply regret," I promised coldly, each word laced with unwavering resolve. Driven by anger and a newfound urgency, I intensified my documentation efforts. Surveillance footage now captured every incriminating moment, Karen issuing threats, trespassing boldly, orchestrating destruction. My attorney, Jason Michaels, meticulously prepared our case, coordinating with law enforcement and gathering critical testimonies from intimidated neighbors finally ready to break their silence. "She believes she's untouchable," Jason warned gravely, eyes stern with resolve, "but arrogance will be her downfall." The decisive HOA meeting felt charged with palpable tension. Karen arrogantly assumed the podium, her voice sharp and commanding as always, oblivious to the imminent confrontation. Her gaze swept smugly across the crowd until uniformed officers entered quietly from the back. The lead officer stepped forward authoritatively. "Karen Simmons, you're under arrest for harassment, trespassing, falsifying reports, and financial misconduct." The room erupted into stunned silence. Karen turned pale, her clipboard trembling violently in her grip. "This is outrageous! He's the criminal here!" "We have overwhelming evidence to the contrary," the officer replied calmly, producing a warrant. "You're coming with us." Karen looked desperately around, eyes wild with panic. "You planned this!" she screamed at me, voice cracking with hysteria. I stepped forward, my voice steady and resolute. "You planned your own downfall, Karen." Neighbors murmured in disbelief as Karen was handcuffed. Her clipboard, once a symbol of power, slipped from her grasp and crashed dramatically to the floor, echoing through the stunned silence, a powerful metaphor for her complete and public defeat. Karen's scream of rage and despair reverberated dramatically, punctuating the final collapse of her reign.